Viktor Orbán, once hailed as a champion of freedom and democracy, is nowadays often portrayed as an authoritarian strongman and a threat to the core values of the European Union. During his time in politics, he served as Prime Minister of Hungary for a total of 15 years, including the last 11 consecutive ones. Following his re-election in 2010, he began to reshape the country according to his political beliefs and became known for his tough stance on migration and increasing tensions between Brussels and Budapest. These constant conflicts, as well as his resilience, quickly turned him into a popular figurehead for various anti-European and anti-establishment movements across the continent. In this episode, we would like to show how various events during his political career influenced his political convictions and answer the question of how the young man, who after 1990 was seen as the European Union's hope for a new liberal Hungary, could become one of its greatest adversaries. Welcome to PannonianReport. Viktor Orbán was born on the 31st of May 1963 in Székesfehérvár and grew up in poor rural circumstances. Viktor Orbán's childhood was marked by poverty, hard physical work, and a life without running or even hot water. After successfully graduating from high school in 1981, he completed his basic military service from 1981 to 1982. During this time, Viktor Orbán went from being the leader of the youth organization of the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party to an opponent of the communist system, shocked by the brutality of political indoctrination within the military and reprisals against dissidents. After leaving military service, Viktor Orbán, who was now increasingly active in politics, returned to his studies and began studying law in Budapest, which he successfully completed in 1987. In 1988, he was one of the co-founders of the Alliance of Young Democrats, or how they are now known, Fidesz. Viktor Orbán's political career began in the summer of 1989, when he, as a then completely unknown young student, gave a speech in Budapest's Hero Square in front of 250,000 people. The occasion was the reburial of Imre Nagy, former Hungarian Prime Minister and hero of the 1956 uprising against the Soviet Union. Viktor Orbán was the last of 6 speakers and gave an address on behalf of the young generation. The short and succinct speech was more sharply worded than the previous ones and became Orbán's political breakthrough. In his speech, Viktor Orbán demanded Hungary's national sovereignty and self-determination, the withdrawal of the Russian troops, and free elections. With this speech, which was also broadcasted abroad, Viktor Orbán and his opposition movement Fidesz suddenly became known both at home and abroad. Viktor Orbán thus became the figurehead of Hungarian youth who wanted to throw off the yoke of communism and emulate the West. In the first free election in Hungary in 1990, Fidesz received 9% of the vote and Viktor Orbán entered the parliament. The liberal parties, Fidesz and SDS, which had acted as the spearhead of the anti-communist movement, were defeated in the 1990 elections by the conservative MTF, which presented itself as an inclusive, calm and centrist party. In the following years, Viktor Orbán's Fidesz successfully established itself in the liberal camp and was admitted to the Liberal International in 1992. Viktor Orbán's election as vice president of the Liberal International, a position he held between 1993 and 2000, as well as the hosting of the Liberal World Conference in Budapest, also show that Orbán and the Fidesz party were quite popular on the international stage. But the opening of Hungary and the long-awaited accession to the West did not bring the desired economic boom or upswing. The expectations within the Hungarian society regarding the system change at the time of the fall of communism were characterized by a high degree of euphoria and also naivety. People hoped for a fast increase in their standard of living to the Western level. However, the change in the political and economic system confronted the Hungarian economy with unexpected problems and led to significant economic setbacks. The gross domestic product shrank by about 20% between 1988 and 1993. Real wages fell by a total of 12% in 1990 and 91. Inflation reached dramatic levels of 35% in 1991 and 23% in 1992, and only fell below the 20% mark in 1993. However, it still remained quite high. The government tried to stabilize the country by keeping salaries artificially high and unemployment low. However, this could only be financed by taking on debt, and the government eventually had to abandon the effort heavily in debt. Unemployment, which had been kept artificially low by the communist system and was therefore practically unknown, rose to 12% due to the closure of restructuring of numerous enterprises and the resulting loss of around 500,000 jobs as a result of the system change. These upheavals led to noticeable setbacks in the incomes, wealth, and purchasing power of large sections of the population and to dissatisfaction with the ruling MDF party. During its time in opposition, Fidesz's popularity rose sharply, benefiting greatly from the growing dissatisfaction with the conservative MDF party. Polls conducted in 1993 even showed Fidesz as the most popular party, and Viktor Orbán was convinced that they could succeed in replacing the ruling MDF in the next elections in 1994. Viktor Orbán declared that in order to achieve this goal, Fidesz would have to change from a purely liberal party to a liberal people's party, breaking several taboos of the former youth movement. In particular, the gradual opening of the so far deeply anti-clerical Fidesz towards more religious and conservative voter groups. He also began to deconstruct the self-perception of Fidesz as a youth organization, which still had an upper age limit for members. In addition to the reform course within Fidesz, there was also a rift between the two liberal parties, the urban SDS and the rural-dominated Fidesz. Viktor Orbán's reforms sparked discontent within the party, and some members favored a closer alliance with the SDS. As a result of this disagreement, significant amounts of members left the Fidesz and joined the liberal SDS, deepening the divide between the two parties. The temporary high in the polls began to crumble, and the Fidesz only just managed to enter parliament and spent another legislative period in opposition. Despite the sobering election results, however, Viktor Orbán had managed to prevail over his party's internal opponents and assert himself as the sole party leader. At the 1993 Fidesz Congress, the National Liberal Path was officially proclaimed for the party, and a gradual return to the supposed down-to-earth national values of the rural population began. Orbán's course, critical of the SDS, was seemingly confirmed when, after the 1994 elections, the formerly anti-communist SDS formed a coalition with the MSP. With the merger of the liberal and socialist forces in a coalition of almost 72% and the decline of the conservative MDF, a political vacuum right of center was now forming in Hungarian politics. Orbán recognized the emerging vacuum in the conservative camp, and as the bourgeoisie democratic forum, MDF had been steadily losing votes, winning only 38 mandates in the 1994 elections, down from 165 previously. Fidesz, struggling for votes, began to spread towards the vacuum left by the MDF, and the opportunity thus arose to continue Fidesz's process of political change from a liberal to a more national direction. The political transformation of Fidesz from a liberal to a conservative party thereby finally manifested itself in the diplomatic arena in 2000, when Fidesz made the switch from the Liberal International to the European People's Party. The political calculation seemed to work, and Fidesz experienced a steady increase in approval ratings. Following the 1998 elections, Fidesz was able to form a government for the first time. Viktor Orbán led a coalition government consisting of three parties: Fidesz, MDF, and the FKGP. His first term as prime minister was overshadowed by numerous conflicts between the coalition parties. The negotiation of the national budget alone lasted for 2 years and was finally concluded with a minimal compromise that left all parties unsatisfied. Furthermore, the government's work was hampered by a scandal involving the leader of the coalition party, FKGP, and Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, who eventually resigned from all his posts within the government in the year of 2001. The coalition between Fidesz and the FKGP continued formally until 2002, but almost all cooperation between the parties ended. This difficult and unstable first term in office was another formative event for Viktor Orbán and strengthened his resolve to further expand Fidesz's influence in the conservative camp in order to be less dependent on coalition partners in the future. After his defeat in the 2002 elections, Orbán re-emerged as an energetic and determined opposition leader, adept at exploiting the growing polarization within the Hungarian electorate. Orbán began to unite the smaller Christian and conservative parties under the slogan "One Camp, One Flag", and integrated them into Fidesz. In 2006, this development had already progressed to the point where Fidesz had fully integrated both the positions of the voters of its former coalition partners, the FKGP and the MDF. The years between 2002 and 2010 were characterized above all by a growing polarization within Hungarian politics. The left wing of Hungarian politics gathered around MSP and Ferenc Gyurcsány, while the political right centered itself around Fidesz and Viktor Orbán. This conflict finally flared up after the MSP's renewed victory in the 2006 parliamentary elections. On the 17th of September, an internal speech by Gyurcsány from the 26th of May was leaked, in which he told the MPs of his parliamentary group how he and his close confidants had lied to the public for years in order to win the recent parliamentary elections. The speech provoked anger and outrage among large parts of the Hungarian population. The opposition parties demanded the prime minister's resignation, and violent riots broke out in Budapest. Viktor Orbán knew how to exploit the publication of this speech for his own cause and began a delegitimation campaign against the government and its institutions. This scandal left the ruling MSP in a weak position, and for the next 4 years, as well as the financial crisis of 2008, brought the MSP to its knees. In the 2010 elections, the Fidesz-KDNP party alliance won around 68% of the mandates, whereas the newly formed far-right Jobbik secured around 12% of the mandates at the first attempt. In the landslide election victory of the right, Viktor Orbán finally saw his opportunity and legitimization to fundamentally transform the system built by the socialists. In Orbán's eyes, the system change of 1989 and 90s involving the old rulers had been incomplete, and he used this notion to legitimize the massive restructuring of the state before himself and the Hungarian electorate. However, Viktor Orbán's self-image had changed over the years, as had his understanding of the old elites. Whereas in 1990, Viktor Orbán had still seen the liberal parties as pioneers against communist rule, the coalitions between the liberal and socialist forces in 1994, as well as in 2002 and 2006, had permanently destroyed this image. Viktor Orbán clearly voiced this change of mind by calling the Hungarian liberals communists with a university degree. The consequence for Viktor Orbán from the experiences of the past was thus that for a successful and final change of system, both the socialist and the liberal element had to be banished from Hungarian politics. The severe legitimacy crisis of the liberal state following the scandals and failed policies of the MSP government, coupled with a 2/3 majority in parliament, enabled Viktor Orbán to begin the restructuring of the Hungarian state according to his own ideas. At the center of this new state is the idea of the Hungarian nation. Viktor Orbán's policy is based on a clear political and value difference between the Hungarian nation and the Hungarian state. The state is seen only as a political construct, a tool to enforce the interests of the nation. The state is thus not sacred, nor permanent, and can therefore be reshaped at will and depending on the needs of the nation. The form of government, just like the state's borders, is therefore fleeting and subject to change over time. In contrast to the Hungarian state, however, the Hungarian nation is something permanent, unchanged, and sacred in Viktor Orbán's eyes. This mentality is evident in many of Viktor Orbán's speeches and was further emphasized by multiple amendments in the Hungarian constitution. However, Viktor Orbán's massive restructuring of the Hungarian state, which had been ongoing since 2010, is increasingly facing political resistance and has been one of the main reasons for the sharp deterioration in relation between Brussels and Budapest. The pressure on Hungary and Viktor Orbán has been growing in recent years, while the Article 7 procedure is pressuring the Fidesz in Brussels and the de facto expulsion from the EPP weakened their political influence. Viktor Orbán also faces challenges at home due to the ongoing corona crisis, as well as an historic effort by a united opposition to unseat him in the upcoming 2022 elections. Those, however, are topics for our future videos. This has been the Pannonian Report. Subscribe to our channel to not miss any new content and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Please feel free to let us know your opinion in the comments. This is it for today. See you guys in the next episode.